Feel free to jump in anytime.
You know, it's when you look back on your life and
Yeah,
you
no,
realize
this will be
how
one of the
shabby
moments.
some of the shit was that we pulled off and got lucky.
Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kimberly Westcott, and I'm with the Democracy at Work New York Coordinating Committee. And we originally were hoping to present to you a wonderful panel on advancing workers' control against the capitalist offensive and saving our communities. Unfortunately, the coordinator of this panel, Tim Skirmahorn, became suddenly ill and is in the hospital. And we hope he'll do better, but unfortunately that left us with a lot of loose ends, and it seems as though none of the original panelists are here to have the conversation. You're here to have the conversation, and it turns out that people from Democracy at Work New York are here also. So we would change this format substantially and give you an option for a lot more interaction. I would ask if people are interested to come down and move down, and maybe we can see some things that are intersecting in our interests in this area.
Yes, come on down.
You know, this is also an experiment in adapting format. So if you would like, and of course this is not the original panel that you look for, you're welcome to move on. But I'm going to invite you to come down so we can have a conversation a little bit about...
You don't need to speak into that mic.
Into this mic?
Yes.
Okay. Is this better?
Please be very flexible.
Okay.
Let's stay selective by getting a little closer.
Okay.
People in the back could be this behind and come a little closer.
Yeah, come on up.
So wonderful on the show. Because then when we have conflict, we look into each other.
Thank you very much. So, I can just speak for my own interests in this area. I'm a person who works in ending criminal punishment. I'm interested in resourcing black and brown communities and fighting poverty. That's where I got into this work. Other people on this panel that I'd like to introduce you to have other interests that brought them there. And I'd like to introduce the people to my right. This is Alan Schulman, this is Bob Drinan, and this is Lupe Ganier. And if you would like to say a few words about yourselves and tell us just why you've been drawn to this work, I think it'd be really important.
So I love this. This is going to be real history. Hi, thanks for staying, because microphone. Thanks for staying. Can you hear me? Good. There's a lot of experience and a lot of stuff that we're involved in. Let me tell you a little bit about my own history. I retired from the public school system, having been forced to teach school in 1968 to avoid the Vietnam War, and walked right into the 1968 community control strike in the public schools. And within 3 days, I had no idea of the issues. All I knew is I was saving my ass by becoming a school teacher. And within 3 days, I was the director of something called the High Bridge Freedom Academy, which was organized by parents and community because the UFT, the teachers union in New York City, had shut the schools, and over some issues, particularly around the citywide effort at giving a voice to communities that were underprivileged, underserved. Anyway, those weeks sort of forged the rest of my life. I ended up earning a living in the public schools, but also, if you're old enough to remember that strike, the one thing that's glaring was the racism of the UFT and the union position in opposition to the black community and opposition to progressive people who were looking for a better way. And it sort of led to a whole lifetime of being against things. I helped organize an organization called PAIR, People Against Racism in Education. And then there was People United Against Racism and Political Repression. And it was 35 years of being against stuff. And then frankly, I retired and had time to start renegotiating my brain. And I heard Rick Wolff, and I started reading some of his economic analysis and said, okay, it makes sense that instead of being against something, I want to feel good. And I started attending meetings and help organize the New York chapter of Democracy at Work, which essentially is just committed to a recognition that no matter what the other problems we're fighting and what the other things and issues are that we're involved in, they're made worse by a system that no longer can serve the people, and that it can't be reformed enough, and that while there's very little we can do at the moment, we're doing it, and all around us are the seeds and the building blocks for a next economy, worker-owner cooperatives all around the country. So that's what Democracy at Work New York has been about, really giving people an opportunity to come into the issue of worker-owner cooperatives, solidarity economics, and now, because we've been joined by Rebecca Lurie, who you're going to meet in another panel, we become eco-socialists. Anyway, it's good to see you, and thank you for staying.
Great. Bob Joinen.
Hi. Kim and I are married. Tim Skimmelhorn grew up in Brooklyn, and he was a student at the school in Ocean Hill, Brownsville. Fiasco happened, which divided this city forever around race issues, and Albert Shanker using that wedge to divide the populations. And Alan was involved with that. That's not me. Alan was involved with that, and Tim was a student there. So for my history, and then to get back to Tim, because I'm looping around to Tim, who created this panel and is in the hospital today. Tim is an African-American man. He worked at Transit, where I work in the law department. And Tim was a train operator. He led what he calls the insurrection. The insurrection for Tim was to bring the Transport Workers Union. Thank you. Local.
Just speak right into it.
All right. Okay. Local 100, which has always been a progressive union, was the first union in this country to allow black people into that union. But to move them from where they were at that time, which was not very revolutionary, not very radical, not very progressive, back onto the roots that they had. And so Tim left a legacy at Transit of people that understand that in unionism, It's not about personality. It's not about what that person is. It's about issues. It's about how to present issues. It's how to have a backbone and be strong around issues. But it's not about personality. And so he left that huge legacy for the union when he retired. So a lot of the history, and so I think the point of view here, and only two more points at this time, is that capitalism inherently creates inequality, inherently creates suffering, and it does that because wealth is extracted from working people and poor people, and redistributed to the wealthy. That inequality, and that subordination of people, and race has to be a conscious part of understanding that inequality, because race in this country goes all the way back to slavery, right, and all the way up to today. There's a direct line. But that inequality is justified by a number of theories, and it can be based on religion or biology and a whole range of things, right? And it's back. It is back today. People are talking about it. So that's where I am. And just about me and my connection to Tim, I was president of International Brotherhood of Teamsters 1518 at the New School, and we went on strike in the late 70s, and then I was the president of the Legal Aid Society Union for a while. Unions are important, and last point, Kali Akuno, who is going to be here, is from Jackson, Mississippi. Kali and a group of people are developing an economic, what's called a solidarity economy, which you're probably familiar with the term. But Jackson is very poor, and the racism goes way back. There are more lynchings in Mississippi than anywhere else. And they're trying to take this poor community that's been underserved for hundreds of years, right, 100 years, and build a framework of business models that will cooperate with each other. And from Kali's point of view and from Tim's point of view, and I think that from Kim will talk about this solidarity economy has always been part of the black experience in Africa and in this country. They've always, as best they can, tried to work with each other. And it's very important as we move forward and we think about unions and economic relations that we understand the role of race in this country. So, and I hope everybody's going to participate. I'm sure everybody here has more important things to say than I do, and I hope we can have a broad discussion.
Great. Thank you. Lupe.
Hi, I'm Lupe Family, the author of To Face It. So I'd like to see the hands of people who write in here. Okay, great. Writers, I want questions from you for the panel, because you write and you'll write the answers. Thank you. I'd like to see people who know someone who's of color or African American who's in the hospital. Okay, this is a reality that people of color will die sooner and are more attacked by health issues. How many people already knew that? Okay, great. Yeah. So we're dealing with racism right here at this panel. That's what I'm trying to say. You know, I have come to panels and I say, oh my God, they're damn disorganized. What the hell is going on? Racism is going on. I wanted to really state that up front. Now I'm going to suggest that you start to write your questions, because I like to do interactive panels anyway. And I'm sure, did people come here with thoughts in their minds? Okay, I know you did, Bob. I spoke with you before. You wanted to know which panel you were supposed to be at. Okay, so why I'm saying that is because flexibility is going to advance worker control. I worked for the TWU's aspect of MTA. In other words, I was a bus driver. Tim and I met in the 80s, and I was the second night worker of women with 400 men. So do you think I suffered some sexism?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And you know, it was because of the Hell on Wheels dissident faction of the the Transport Workers Union. I had people who were in Teamsters for a Democratic Union. I don't know if people know that fight too within the Teamsters. But in other words, dissidents who said we will not allow bureaucratic unionism to go forward. So I think if nothing else, if you can't seem to catch on to something from this panel, please know that it's so important to follow the working teachers in Kentucky, in Virginia, West Virginia, et cetera, because those are the people that are actually pushing the unions forward. And otherwise, we're going to have the same bureaucratic unionism that we've had in the past. I also like to say to the writers, any cultural writers out there, Okay, no cultural writers. Come on, you write poems. I know you. Okay. Why I'm saying that, because another way to advance worker control is to get a worker culture out there. You know, people don't even know many stories about workers, many films about workers, many paintings about workers. They're all from Diego Rivera and from the past. That's a real way that you can bring these informational issues to the public. For example, there was a play called The Black Conference, and we have a study group. I hope we'll get to talk to you about that study group, because I think that's a very good way for people to bring young people together. Look around the room, there's not very many people that are under 25 in here, and that is really important. If we want to advance worker control, who is going to be the workers? Who's going to work till they're 75? It's going to be the young people, because they are making this gig economy, and those of us who have had unionized jobs, we've been able to get retirement. We've been able to get some kind of a pension. They won't have it, so we've got to get young people in. And as Dr. Williams said yesterday in another panel, the young people relate a lot to culture. I know I did as a young person. So I really encourage you, if you know music about workers or theater about workers, encourage people to go and support, and also to stretch it into, make it a talk back afterwards. In the play that we went to, we were shut out. In other words, what if they told you now that the police came in and you had to leave, and that was the end of the theater? Would you be angry, yes or no? I don't hear you. Exactly, and so that forced us to face what happens to workers, because it happened to us as theater goers. They told us to get out, and the play ended right there, and we did not have a chance to go back and applaud the cast or anything. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm being a little humorous, and I'm kind of forcing you past your edges, you know, sort of theoreticians. But I want us to realize, if you want to advance worker control and save our community, you got to be in the community, and you got to do things that the community is relating to. Otherwise, what I have found is young people have told me, Lupe, you're talking somewhere that I'm not at. So I wanted to put that out. The other thing I wanted to say before we go into the next part is that the solidarity economy is very known in the Caribbean. It's a place of sharing money that a lot of white people, I find, who are from the petty bourgeois, the almost rich, or teachers, they don't have that same consciousness, except white wealth being from the parents. And in the black community in Harlem, I myself have participated with older black women, 80, 70, who do not have pensions, and they say, we'll chip in $50 a month, Susu, and we all put it together, and then we share around who gets that $500 each month. That may sound like, that's so stupid and simple. You know something? That gives people hope, and that allows people to decide that they're going to continue to get together and share their wealth until we can exactly advance the socialist or the more radical solidarity economy that we'll talk about with Cooperation Jackson. So I wanted to be a little radical in the way I presented, because I want you all to ask, you know, funny and silly and crazy questions, because that's when you deal with a panel like this that we didn't expect to be on. We had to be flexible. We could have said, oh, we're just going to cancel, right? We could have said that, right? Okay. And we didn't, because we said the people came with some interesting information in their heads, and we could share.
Thank you very much. All right. So I just wanted to introduce some concepts and see if people responded to this. One of the really interesting things to me about Cooperation Jackson, are many of you familiar with Cooperation Jackson and Kalia Kuno, who's going to be on this panel? To me, when you think about cooperative work, so many folks do approach that as an economic alternative. But in so many ways, the idea of cooperative communalism, which really has existed, at least in the black community and other communities, for hundreds of years, mutual aid, it's a way of life. And so when you think about cooperatives, there's an expanding space that actually can include human rights. And I'm very interested when I read Jackson Rising and I think about their project, about how to incorporate what they're doing in their community to create humanizing reciprocal spaces where there's self-determination and where there can be an infusion of human rights, not just with principles, but really to create spaces where people can be people, you know. I don't know, have any of you read Jackson Rising? Yes. I don't know if that struck you, but in many of the places where I'm seeing cooperatives take on more of a communal dimension, I'm hopeful that there's always a human rights frame in the background, because it's about creating the relationships, in my view, that not just create self-determination and self-sufficiency, but create a space for people to live with some respect and to have democracy and to have some ownership in their own community. So I'm wondering, are any of the people here involved in efforts that look to create worker co-ops or cooperative solidarity economic work in a community? Yes? Would you want to share a little about what you're interested in, and perhaps you would too? Yeah, come on. Yeah, come on up. Come on up. Absolutely.
Is this one on also? Everybody who comes up can sit right here.
Yes, my name is Juan Fernandez. I'm a construction worker.
All right.
And we need construction companies specifically designed for people, low-income communities. That doesn't exist. And we in the black and brown community have a great asset that is being used against us. It is the music. The music is devastating millions of our youth because it encourages crime and guns and disrespect of our sisters and everything else. I own a little house in Richmond, Virginia, and a friend called me about a year ago that her daughter with 2 little girls was on the verge of becoming homeless. I called her and I asked her, how much can you afford a month? She told me $350. I said, cool, I'm not a capitalist. I don't want to join capitalism, I want to challenge it. And so she's been there for about a year with her 2 little girls, and she has a safe place. But in that community, there are empty houses everywhere. And it breaks my heart that we can't have a group of construction, we have hundreds of thousands of us in the blue collar, but there are skilled workers. And the houses stand there waiting for the investors to come and take them over. And there are women and children that are homeless who need those houses. And the construction workers need the work. I'd like to say one more thing. About 2 years ago, I met a brother of African descent. I noticed that he had suffered a stroke. Then I noticed that he was homeless. I gave him a room in my house too. And then I found the most painful aspect of his existence, that although he was homeless, he had a house. I said, how can this be? And so I went around the black community, the brown community, even Native American communities to try to get some support to put together a construction crew and redo the house, but I couldn't get any support.
That's great.
So I'm here to try to meet at least one person that I can work with. My brother's a very important musician here in New York City. He has a doctorate degree, and he wants to come in. Some of his friends have been the percussionists for Carlos Santana, the Allman Brothers, and all kinds of David Byrne. And there is so much beauty in the artistic community, and we have put those assets to work for the community, because actually there is no alternative. There was a time where the ecology is being devastated. Puerto Rico is devastated. I'm from that part of the world, the Caribbean. And so we must come together and offer an alternative, especially to the women and children that are going through hell, and they don't have anyone to rescue them. So if anyone is interested in joining me, please contact me, and we got to get this off the ground.
What's your name again?
Juan Fernandez.
Juan Fernandez.
Right.
And is there a group that you're with?
No, I've been on this journey for many years. I have not found a group that wants to work. There are a lot of people that want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But talk is cheap. Yeah. It's abstract. The people in pain don't recognize talk, because talk doesn't feed a child or doesn't rescue a homeless person. That's right. At the end of the talk, everybody goes home. I'm in Brooklyn. Well, I can give you my name right. My name is Juan Fernandez. My number is 347-485-2863. I came to the first reform in 2012, trying to do the same thing. And I've been on this journey for 15 years, and I'm still at it because I have a responsibility.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So do people know about New York City network of worker co-ops? I just want to see a show of hands. Okay, great. So look around the room. These are your resources for afterwards. But the conflict with today is they are having a conference on worker co-ops right now, today, June 9th. So the website, I believe, is NYCNAC, meaning NYCNOWC, New York City Network of Worker Co-ops. And it has, in addressing your question, but also in all of our questions, because I found a yoga co-op for treating back and scoliosis issues, worker-owner healers who are dealing with those issues for the public. Anybody here have back issues? Okay, so, you know, we don't have to always go to the Western capitalist doctor for the pills. So New York City Network of Worker Co-ops is really a very good directory. They also have skills, training, so if you have no idea how to do a worker co-op or you've never even heard of a worker co-op, you can at least start referring people to that. I know there's probably some university or high school teachers in here. The other thing that Dr. Williams said yesterday at that other panel was that we have to get our youth able to read and write at a level where they'll get promoted at jobs, but also where they could write grants to the city of New York, because the city of New York is actually, did people know the city of New York is giving funds to worker co-ops? Okay, so I hope you'll speak to that at some moment, because that's very important for us to know how to get the money out of the capitalist economy, which is our city government, which we paid our taxes for, and put it back into our hands.
Thank you very much. Sir, we have a gentleman who wanted to share some information on the cooperative work that he's doing. Sir, what's your name? Please.
I'm going to talk at the next.
That's what's great.
Yeah.
When we're unexpected, you step up.
I'm going to talk at the next panel, L117, on the workers' economy. So
great.
It's a continuation of this conversation. So my name is Marcelo Vieta. I was born in Argentina. I'm a professor at the University of Toronto, so work in Toronto. I grew up in Canada, but I am of Argentine immigrant family. And I do work on worker co-ops. I study worker co-ops, and I help to foster worker co-ops. I've been working with the worker recuperated enterprises of Argentina since 2005. I'm coming out with a book on the phenomenon, and this year, hopefully, it's already with the publisher, part of the historical materialism series, where you can read more on that. You can also read the work of Peter Ranis, who's emeritus professor from CUNY, who's done a lot of work on Argentina as well, and the Empresas Recuperadas. I've also done work with the Legge Marcora, or the Marcora law, Italian worker buyout phenomenon that I believe Richard Wolff writes about. So I, myself with some Italian colleagues, compiled a database of all of the worker buyouts from this Legge Marcora phenomenon, which is really innovative, and it's not as, in Argentina, the worker recuperated firms happened around the crisis of 2001, but are continuing to emerge, and they're mostly crisis-driven occupations and conversions to worker cooperatives. In Italy, they've been supported by the vast and quite wealthy cooperative movement. Wealthy because the very cooperatives in Italy, cooperatives give to the cooperative movement. So in Italy, all cooperatives have to give 3% of their net revenues to the cooperative movement. This fund then goes on to foster new cooperatives, right? So here's an alternative economy, a cooperative economy that's been emerging for many decades. The Italian state and some innovative bureaucrats within the Italian state have worked with the worker cooperative movement to help fund the conversion of firms in crisis and also firms with succession issues to worker co-ops. So one of the innovative models in Italy is to use unemployment insurance. So an advance of up to 3 years of workers' unemployment insurance. And if workers get together and say, we want to take over this factory, buy it out, we can use 3 years, hence the unemployment insurance we will receive, to buy out the firm. And there's a slew of other funding mechanisms in place. So there's lots of models like this around the world.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, especially in Argentina, how much of the worker cooperative activity is being generated from the poor communities? Are there any kind of community-based ownership activities that are going on
yes.
there?
Yeah, so the worker recuperated enterprises are only a small fraction of a vast worker cooperative and community cooperative movement. In Argentina, also former informalized workers that were employed mostly in the state sector that then became unemployed, that were called cartoneros because they were garbage collectors, they have formed into cooperatives, and many of them are very successful cooperatives.
Do they get state or any kind? Can you describe that a little?
Yeah, there are state subsidies for that. So the worker recuperated enterprises, so mostly industrial firms, they receive not much state funding. In fact, nil almost, just some salary top up. But the cartoneros, or this new wave of worker co-ops that was established through in the last kind of more progressive government under the Kirchners, they managed to link social welfare plans to the creation of cooperatives. Now, many traditional cooperative movement folks say, well, this isn't a real cooperative because it's state funded, or it's started by the state. But actually, many of them have gone on to produce to create quite successful and sustainable cooperatives.
Is there one or two that you would highlight?
There are, I'm more familiar with there are a couple of cartonero ones. One is called Reciclando Sueños, Recycling Dreams. This is probably the most successful one. You can just type in Recycling Dreams Argentina, Reciclando Sueños. And this is a former, this is in the Buenos Aires suburb of La Matanza, where it's located, and you can go and visit it, and it's quite a successful one. And there's thousands of.
No, it sounds wonderful. Yeah. Can I ask some more? You're a wonderful resource.
Oh, sure, yeah.
When you think about New York, or you think about the United States, is there anything that you could see that you would recommend to support the development of community-based cooperatives? Yeah. Could you offer that?
Well, I'm going to pass the baton to Peter on this question, if I can, because he's done work on this.
Certainly.
Peter, is it okay if you come and speak to it? But before that, I just want to say that what I'm doing in Canada right now is taking these two kind of, I'm a researcher, right? But I'm also politically committed academic, that I don't feel that I can separate my academic interests and intellectual interests from my political and ethical political commitments, right? Sure. So I think it's really important. So I try to work with, not study over or study these firms, but I try to work with and share their stories and help out in any way I can. So what we're doing in Canada is we just received a substantial amount of funding, believe it or not, from the Canadian state to study conversions to cooperatives. Now in Canada, and I'm assuming in the States the reality is similar, Canada has 1.7 million small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. These are mom and pop shops, workshops of multiple kinds, grocery stores, mechanic shops, 5 employees, 10 employees, up to 50 employees. So 1.7 million of those. It drives the Canadian economy. Most Western economies are actually driven by these SMEs, right? So Canada, about 95% of the Canadian businesses in Canada are SMEs. In Italy, 99% of the economy is driven by small shops, right? And in Argentina, it's similar. I'm assuming the States is similar in this regard. So the vast employment happens from small and medium-sized enterprises. Now in Canada, 500,000 of those 1.7 million have owners that are nearing retirement, right? So of those owners that are nearing retirement, only we don't know the exact number, but it's about between 10 and 20% have succession plans, which means that the vast majority of those 500,000 over the next 5 years will close. What that means is that jobs will be lost. This is a pretty big deal when it comes to small community, right? In Canada, we don't have Main Street, we have Queen Street usually. That's our Main Street. But it's a big deal in Queen Street, right? Or Main Street, right? However you want to call it. So this collaborative work that I'm doing in Canada together with an committed academic also from the University of Sherbrooke in Quebec, and Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, it's Canada's Cooperative Federation. We're looking at ways of seeing how Canada can become more of an enabling environment for these conversions and to actually promote this model for the future economic possibilities of Canada, so to promote the conversion model, to also communicate to business owners that this is an option for you. You can actually to your employees, or you can give it to them. Actually, like David Erdahl has given his business in the UK to his employees. And then thirdly, to actually work with the already existing legislation in place in Canada, that, because in Canada one can do this already. Workers can buy out firms and convert them to cooperatives, but it's not well known. So what we want to do is promote this initiative, and then study case studies that kind of illustrate this model. So I'm assuming that in the States, a similar, and I know conversions have happened in the States. There are many examples, right?
Can I ask you another?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, well, they're actually in our next panel. So Republic Windows and Doors, so New Era Windows. Armando Robles will be on our next panel, so I invite you to come to I-117. Yeah, and Armando's here today, and Jesus Torres from Mexico, another Empresa Recuperada is a tire factory from Mexico, will be here, and we'll be talking about this.
So the one question I have when you talk about conversions, is there a link to developing a training pathway for youth to come in? It's one thing to identify people who could potentially buy in, but for people in communities to acquire the skills and then be able to take on the actual work, is there an aspect of that?
Well, this is what our work is about.
Okay.
Our work is educating as well. We have an educational component, but this is needed.
Yeah.
Like, for example, you won't find in any Canadian, K-12 curriculum, or even in university business curricula mention of co-ops. If it is, it's in passing, right? So we can work with the educational system, with the state in this regard, to actually start to promote this. This is a legitimate business, right? And they're quite viable. And they're actually better suited to overcome crisis. I mean, they work better in crisis moments than do conventional firms. They actually unemploy workers less, right? Because workers that work in cooperatives are committed to their firms much more so than workers that are just employees, right? So there's many reasons why we would want more cooperatives.
Ellen.
And so the educational piece is still up to us to actually work out as well, because it's very needed. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think Alan Schulman wanted to jump in very quickly.
What we're seeing in New York and in the United States is a nascent political movement that links the regeneration of democracy and worker democracy to co-op and worker owner. Does that movement exist in Canada? And
yes, it does. We have the Canadian Worker Cooperative Federation as well that we're working with as well. Sorry, we have the Canadian Worker Cooperative Federation in Canada that we're working with as well, and they've been advocating conversions and expanding and making democracy at work flourish for many decades. Quebec is the province of Quebec is a particular center of worker co-ops, and there they've worked closely with the syndicat, the major federation, labor federation. They also work closely with the Quebec Social and Solidarity Economy, which is more institutionalized in Quebec than it is in the rest of Canada. And there's lots of funds available for conversions and for creations of new cooperatives. And there very much is this growing movement of democratizing work. I mean, we don't have an entity called Democracy at Work there, but we're familiar with your work and with the work of others. With, for example, the Ohio employee ownership folks at Kent State University and others, and we're connected also with the American Co-op movement and the Worker Co-op Federation here as well. Yeah, but very much so.
How are you connected?
Oh, through, for example, I'm part of the Canadian Association of Studies in Cooperation, so we're academics and practitioners. So we just met. Our conference was in Regina, Saskatchewan. I came here instead of going there. I should have been there. So we're an association of academics and cooperative practitioners that we have many people from the States. So Jessica Gordon-Emperich, for example, teaches here at John Jay. She's and her book is, I'm sorry, what was her book?
Collective Courage?
Yeah, Collective Courage on African American cooperatives in the States and the history of that. And she's in Regina right now, so she couldn't be here because she's in Regina at the task, and I'm here. So, but we often, so last year we had a panel on the new cooperativism, what we're calling the new solidarity cooperativism. So these are forms of cooperation that merge with social movements like Cooperative Jackson, like many examples in the States, like Argentina, like Brazil, with the Movimiento Sem Terras in Brazil. They're organized 1.5 million agricultural workers that have occupied fallow land and have converted them to cooperative farms and worker cooperative farms. This is a huge movement in Latin America. The Zapatistas have organized many cooperatives of many kinds. So this is what we mean by the new solidarity cooperativism. Right, so merging, it's not just worker co-ops, but merging social movements that are struggling over land, environment, the ecology, culture, and actually, you know, linking that up with already traditional co-op movements. So that's kind of, so the Canadian cooperative scene, especially us that are involved in also social movements, we're connected with the American cooperative movement. I'd like to expand those connections more, of course. There's always more work to be done. And this is exactly what we'll be talking about at the next panel when we talk about the workers' economy. The Workers' Economy Network is a network that's been meeting since 2007. It started in Argentina from the Movement of Worker Recuperated Enterprises, and the University of Buenos Aires has been working really closely with them. And we have been meeting every couple of years throughout the Americas mostly, and then we have regional chapters in North America, Europe, and we're wanting to expand the network into Africa and Asia, where we bring together cooperators, radical unions, social movements, student groups, and Peter Rannis has been involved in it. My friend Sean from Unifor, from Canada's largest union, who's here today, has been a part of it since the beginning. And these are the types of networks that we have to expand, and we'd like to invite you and all you here to come to the next one, which is going to be in Mexico City, the regional gathering, early November. And if you come to our next panel, you'll find out about it.
Where is it?
It's in I-117. Upstairs.
If it's possible, I'm hoping you'd referred to, is it Professor Rennes?
Yes, I wanted...
I was hoping that you wouldn't mind. It sounds like you're doing some interesting work on community development and co-ops. It might be very illuminating for us to hear.
Yeah, I think Peter can speak to the American like ways that you can expand the cooperative movement in the States. Oh, well, my name is Marcelo Vieta, so... Which website I have?
Anything that people can look up, because remember, it's on video for people who have no.
Oh, yes. Okay, so just type in Workers Economy Network, University of Buenos Aires, and you'll access the Spanish version of the website with the last international encuentro or gathering or summit, which was held in Argentina in 2017. We're in the process of developing a more centralized website, but that's one you can go to. And you can go to my page on the University of Toronto, just type in Marcelo Vieta, University of Toronto, and I'll have links on my faculty page there.
V-I-E-T-A.
V-I-E-T-A, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Peter. Thanks for...
No, thank you for illuminating. That was wonderful.
Kim,
that's great.
Well, while he's coming up,
Yes.
I hope that we'll get into land trust, eco-villages, and recycling in Cooperation Jackson so people can know that a land trust can be formed even in New York City.
Sure thing. Well,
I don't have very much to add to Marcelo's comments. You really covered the waterfront. I just wanted to say that in the United States, the cooperative movement really has focused mostly on women of color and immigrant groups, and I think that's very interesting. For example, the biggest cooperatives in the United States, the home care workers of New York City, which has 3,200 workers. And then you have the Arizmendi bakers in California, and they're Latinos. And then you have the New Era workers of the Chicago Windows workers, and their leadership is certainly Chicanos, Mexican Americans. So I think that's really interesting that people from below, the most underprivileged, have found cooperatives as the way to go. In one case, they did have union support, the electrical workers, which is a progressive union. There are not many progressive unions, but that one happens to be. As Marcelo said, there are many types of cooperatives in Argentina, and I have friends who were in the refuse collection in Tigre, which is a suburb of Argentina. In Argentina, you also have service, you could call these bourgeois cooperatives, editorials, publishers, and you have hotel and hospital cooperatives. So in Argentina, the Argentine workers have shown they can cooperativize almost any area of the economy. That's possible. What they need and what Argentine provinces and municipalities have offered them is expropriation and subsidies. The federal government occasionally under Kirchner has given subsidies. And I agree with Marcelo that these subsidies have created jobs, and from these jobs, these cooperatives have achieved a certain amount of autonomy, even though some have been in public works, but what's the problem with that? In the New Deal, public works existed as well. So I think I've been pushing this, and it was mentioned yesterday at the plenary, and I was so thrilled my heart started beating. The word expropriation was used. Eminent domain was used by Richard Wolff, my God. And I've been using expropriation for years, but my name is not very important, so it's never gotten any play. But when Richard Wolff uses it, wow, then it got some play. And Gail McLaughlin used it in terms of mortgages. In Richmond, it didn't work for varying reasons, but if she gets elected lieutenant governor, it may work I think the election is in 6 days, and hopefully she'll be able to use eminent domain to take over failed factories and provide workers with the right to take over factories. I mean, eminent domain, as you all know, has been used by universities. It's been used by sports teams. It's been used for public parks. Moses has used it too for highways. It's been used for every possible public needs. Why can't it be used for workers for the same reason, to pay taxes, for employment? It's a public policy. It's not even radical. Mm-hmm. It's just to create jobs and keep employment and keep taxes flowing into the coffers. And it keeps money in the community and for the majority of people. So it's something that we need to do. And as American capitalism continues in crisis, eminent domain has to be on the agenda. That's my basic view. There's a bill, speaking of the numbers of the generation that's going to retire in the next few years, the Clinton generation, they're going to retire, and there's a bill by Gillibrand from New York State. She calls it the Main Street Bill. She has a longer name for it. It passed the House. Surprisingly, it passed the U.S. House of Representatives. It's now before the Senate. And that is a bill to provide money and training to allow for small businesses to give their businesses to their workers in return for getting a capital business write-off. So it makes good sense. A lot of these people have kids who don't want to take up the job, and instead of being taken over a little hardware store, instead of being taken over by Ace Hardware, they sell it to their workers. And this allows for the state to provide a subsidy to the workers to take over the business. So I think that this would be a silent revolution in America, which doesn't, is not a lot of Sturm und Drang, but could create a huge shift of capital on behalf of the working class.
Professor, might I ask, because, yes, do you mind? Thank you very much. I'm interested, and I don't know if you were in the panel that Rick Wolff was in with Chris Hedges yesterday, but there was a professor named Adams, and he was speaking on the other end of what is required at the macro level to create conditions for cooperatives. And it's really about, when you think about young, poor African American and black and brown students, how do you get them tooled up in the skill pipeline? It's not just to educate about the idea of cooperatives. I think that's something that's important. But how does this, you can just think about our depleted summer youth internship program that the city is not committed to, and the kind of track that kids aren't getting exposure to work that will help propel them into the next level. And the same with the public school system. I'm wondering, is there a suggestion you might have for sort of enhancing that pipeline, and maybe it's through apprenticeship or through subsidized apprenticeship or something that you've seen that would make sense?
I know there's a new university in Argentina called the National Workers University. It's called the UNT. It's a university founded for first-generation workers who have just had secondary education, and they're all from the unions, and the unions sponsor this university. I mean, that's the kind of thing that we really need. I mean, CUNY itself, community colleges at CUNY would be the perfect place to create cooperative education courses.
There you go.
Now, I don't know how to institute that myself. I'm just a bourgeois intellectual, and I'm a retired CUNY professor, so I don't have that entree anymore, but certainly that would be a possibility.
Sounds like a song. I'm just a bourgeois intellectual from New York. For those of you who dare, tomorrow we're running a workshop called What It Could Look Like If We Happened to Win. And it came out of a conversation that we were having about how unromantic this time is in history, and how much more romance there was being involved in change 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And it's very difficult for younger people particularly to vision what it could look like. And the panel tomorrow it's tomorrow at 12 in L285, next door to this. Kali Akuno from Cooperation Jackson. And literally, it's going to enable the panelists to dream about, if the work continues and we catch the brakes and all the things that are cooperating in these places where there's more advanced solidarity economics happen, what could it look like in Jackson, Mississippi, which some of us we went down there, we spent 6 days in Jackson. 10 miles outside of Jackson, Mississippi, you've left the United States. Those conditions exist everywhere in the world that you've ever traveled. But Kali is they've got a plan called the Jackson Cush Plan that has development that would involve up to 10,000 black workers in that area of Mississippi. Omar Freya, who is the president of the Green Workers Collective in the South Bronx, is one of the panelists. And Omar is going to give us a vision of what it could look like if they continue to expand. And both of those efforts have merged a worker democracy bubbling from the ground up in them. Rick Wolf will be on that panel tomorrow to talk about the economics of the change. Tim was going to do the same with workers. Right. And Rebecca Luria, who runs a worker program at the Murphy Institute of CUNY, is going to be on that panel tomorrow. So and we hope what it is it's going to give us an opportunity to get out from underneath how glacial the progress has been in terms of countering and giving people a way out from underneath capitalism in New York and in the United States, but giving us an opportunity to sort of share a vision into the future that says, hey, we could win this thing, if education and organized labor and folks can pull it together, and the peace movement could understand that there will be no peace under capitalism, and all of the various issue-oriented movements can come together, then it's possible to forge a new American democracy and a new American social order. So come on out tomorrow, 12 o'clock, 285.
Now, that's great. I know this lady here was hoping to ask a question.
Yeah, it was a follow-up in building on your question about macro-level conditions for cooperatives. I'm thinking about, you're talking about training and helping people to move into small enterprises. I live in Washington Heights, Inwood, and among in New York City, among many neighborhoods all over the world, and in New York, we're watching incredible gentrification. And because there's no, and it's pretty much mom and pop economy of mostly Dominican immigrants. And there's still fledgling rent stabilization in housing, which is disappearing, but there isn't any in small shops in New York City. So suddenly people are getting double, tripling rents, and it's putting people out of business. And it's bringing in the big box stores in order to replace it. So we have dynamics of finance capital which are completely undermining the enabling condition for these small mom and pops to exist. So it's not just about a transition for them, to somebody else or to a next generation, but it's the pressures of capital that are obliterating small enterprises. So I'm curious what would be, how do we deal with that?
Was that caught on the video, or should we repeat sort of what the question is?
That audio did not go out to the live stream because she didn't say it into a microphone. So if you could incorporate that question into your response.
That was such a, yes, come up. Thank you for that. That was a very important question.
But she's going to
Yeah. No, Professor, stay.
No, I'm asking the question to you.
Let's see if that microphone is on. Could you tap it? Okay, go ahead.
Hi. A question about the enabling conditions for small enterprises, that it's not only about transition, but in the neighborhood which I live, which is Washington Heights in New York City, there's no rent control for small enterprises. And so what's happening is the boom of finance capital and gentrification in New York and everywhere that we're seeing in the world is pushing small entrepreneurs out. I mean, I live in a block that we just watch about a year, every year. We watch the complete turnover of the small enterprises, and people are pouring their entire savings into starting those, and they're out of business in a year. So the question is, how do we not only do the transition work that you're talking about, but begin to deal with that?
Thank you. Professor.
I'm not sure what the intent of your question was, but yes, it sounds like an attack on eminent domain.
I don't have an agenda. I'm just watching my neighborhood.
Right.
Really.
See, eminent domain sometimes has victims, but usually, in most cases, it's who gains the most from that is, it has been used in a negative way, but it could be used as a positive way because it's a methodology.
Yeah.
For example, when Colombia took over some land, it expropriated a small garage. So it did hurt one family with a garage, and you could say that's terrible. On the other hand, it employed several hundred minority men and women, secretaries, guards, security people in the Columbia.
Professor, I'm thinking it might be that the question is, it's hard for me, how do we fight gentrification and neighborhood destruction? I think that even if we put eminent domain out of it, we're seeing this all over the city, and I'm just wondering, because I agree, I've seen it even in Inwood. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I don't know. I mean, cooperatives in New York City have developed Sunset Park Group. New York City Council has provided, I think, $3.5 million in the last 2 years to form cooperatives in various communities. And that has helped provide jobs within Bronx and Brooklyn mainly. And I think that's been a positive counteraction to gentrification.
Thank you.
But I don't have a particular answer. I know the real estate lobby in New York is all powerful.
Boy.
And we need, we need legislators who are different from the legislators we have. Well, I heard a legislator yesterday, Epstein. He's one of the few who understand that issue. It's a real problem in America
You know, and thank you. I'm thinking one of the other elements that unfortunately Tim would have really brought to this panel, and I'm hoping we can think about it, it seems like there's got to be space for organized labor to kind of find a way into supporting the community movements. And I don't know if anyone in the audience has any insight into, and this is where Jackson is interesting, and I would have enjoyed speaking to Kali about this. Any of you that have read that book know that they have a concept about people's assemblies to try to use that to get people more engaged from the community level and to hopefully create a worker type consciousness that's really a community consciousness for that whole area that is West Jackson. And I don't know if anyone has any thoughts from the perspective of how the unions could, okay, actually there's a gentleman right next to you and there's a woman who wants to ask a question, but if this gentleman could respond. Yeah, come on up.
And if you're going to ask the question, come up also so it could go on the...
Yeah, so first we're going to let this gentleman
come
and then
up with a question so to go on the live stream.
Can I just say something really quickly?
Right
Sure.
here.
Just quickly, when you have more
Sit down and say.
Sorry, Sean. When you have more cooperative businesses in a community,
Thank you,
it's
Professor.
usually run by. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Renz.
When you have more cooperative businesses in a community, it's owned by those that live in the community. When those that live in the community own the businesses in the community, you're going to have less gentrification guaranteed. You're going to have less. When the owners of businesses are shareholders that live somewhere else, they're astronaut, owners. They don't care about the community. But when owners live in the community, when business owners live in the community, they care about the community. They live there. They work there. Co-op members and workers live in the communities where they work, so they're not going to gentrify as much. So
Also, they can press their representatives because they have a lot more clout.
That's right. And in Argentina, what's happened is that workers have taken expropriation, which is an old law, and they've reappropriated, they've recuperated the law of expropriation to benefit workers, and now it's one more out that Argentine workers have to save their jobs and take over their jobs. And they've managed to change the law or change the interpretation of that law. In addition to that, bankruptcy laws have been changed to favor workers. Workers have a right of first refusal in Argentina. So working people and communities can actually change legislation as well to be more sensitive to their needs.
Thank you, Professor Vieta. We have a gentleman here. Sir, what is your name?
My name is Sean Smith.
Sean Smith.
I work at Toronto Airport, and I can tell you what we're doing at the airport at Pearson is we've reimagined the word community. I'm a union organizer at the airport, and unions often view communities as a second front. The workplace is one thing, and then the community is where you live.
Right.
What we've done at the airport, there's 50,000 of us working there, is we view our airport as a community, and we've broken down the barriers between ourselves. So we formed a workers' council that represents all the workers at the airport, irrespective of union, employer, status, or anything else. And then we collectively work against the airport authority to form our own community. And now we meet monthly with the airport. And we still are unions. There's 6 different unions involved in our coalition, but we've created something else, a new community. It requires, and there's a lot of potential in this, because John Jay College is a very good example. This place is unionized top to bottom. There's cleaners that are probably unionized, profs are, and they're all different unions, but none of them work together. Profs go in one room to eat, cleaners probably have no room to eat, and there's no community. And then all the unions talk about community, and that's basically using community groups as cannon fodder for their struggle, as opposed to thinking about the community starting here. Our work is our community.
Yeah.
Transform our communities here to then lead a good example to take that from the workplace into the communities. And that's what we learned in Argentina through the workers taking over their factories. Those factories became community centers, which is what exactly we're trying to do.
That's great.
The one problem you run into in terms of the question on labor is labor unions tend to be very distrustful of this model because it could be perceived as dual unionism or a threat to the business union model. Because we, quite frankly, view bargaining grievance process as a 20th century tool that's no longer effective when you have such a large percentage of workers precarious or in contractualized work. The traditional person like myself who's been 33 years as an Air Canada worker is increasingly less and less a reality for children, like for our kids today, which is why we need to look into a more community union model. So the union movements themselves have to either transition into this type of model or else new models will be formed.
Let me ask you, I know people are very fixated about the upcoming Janus decision. How do you see, and I don't know if you follow that here in the U.S., but do you see that pushing the unions to more of what you're speaking about?
That's actually creating some interesting dynamics on us in Canada because Canada's Puerto Rico and Canada are the only two jurisdictions in the world that have American unions running shop in their countries. And what's been happening to us in Canada is as the American unions are getting squeezed, they're putting more pressure on the Canadian branch offices to forward the funding back to the States. So there's a lot of conflict within the Canadian union movement. We're kind of feeling the effects of this. The Janus decision shows the failure of the business union model. That unions are depending on a closed shop to get their dues as opposed to workers being motivated to contribute to the union. So it becomes almost like a managerial role from the traditional union boss, if you want to use that bad term, it is no longer. They can't just simply count on the dues. They now have to engage their own members. This might be heresy, but I actually think there's something good about the going back to our roots and losing that closed shop feel because it removes that union bureaucracy and unions have to reinvent themselves something more relevant.
Thank you.
That's heresy in my world.
No, it's interesting to hear.
No, I agree. And for those of us who are involved, I'm sorry, dear, those of us involved in the UFT in New York City know that that's a central issue. The union has lorded over policy in New York, eliminated any kind of democracy within the working groups, and this is now 40 years up the road, and it stands to lose its closed shopness, and there's not a lot of fight back going on from a lot of places because, as you say, it may be time for this union to have to either reassemble some kind of a working vision for positive unionism and democratic unionism and reclaim their workforce and 65,000 workers, or lose the union and perhaps something new would be birthed out of it. And
Alan, I think we need to talk a little bit about the, don't leave for a second, land trust, because I don't know if you have land trust to address her question. First of all, I'd like you to say a website, because look, this is a creative panel, and I think it's good for people to be able to reach out later, because this is just 1 or 2 hours in the day, and we have 365 days a year.
We don't, with us, what we as airport workers, in Canada, like the US, if you look when neoliberalism came in, it started with Jimmy Carter in 1978 when he deregulated the airline industry. That was the first step of neoliberalism in the modern era. In Canada, that started in '84 with the deregulation of our industry, then the privatization of my company, Air Canada, in '88, then the corporatization of our airports. Land trust, we don't have that as airport workers, but what has happened in our situation is I've started my life as a government worker as an Air Canada when I was hired in '85, and now I'm a private corporation. My airport's gone from government run to community run, and what we simply do in our situation is the state has become increasingly neoliberal. Our actual Canadian state is less meaningful to us. The airport authority has effectively become our state. So we go to the airport authority. Politicians to us are just people we harass a lot of times.
But you can't get any land from the airport authority, or you can?
Well, what we do is we basically, when we shut down roads and stuff around the airport, we're claiming private or public property. We don't expropriate because we don't have the strength to expropriate, and it'd be hard to expropriate an airport. But we do constantly live on the margins between challenging the question of what is public property. And we've been very effective on that because the airport's afraid if they take too aggressive a stand against us and we win, that we would then start seizing and things like this because it would be start viewing as public. Like we'd start increasing the view of public.
Is there a story? Can they just search the name of your
If you just
group?
simply
Workers?
look up Toronto Airport Workers Council, we've been around for over 20 years. Every May Day, we shut down the roads around the airport. We have a lot of fun.
Well, okay, I want to explain something about land trust. In Jackson, and the website for that group is cooperationjackson.org. Cooperationjackson.org is kind of written and a few pictures, but you can also go on YouTube and see lots of conversations with different various members of the whole cooperation, because it's not just a worker co-op. I think you heard Kim speak about the participatory democracy, people's assemblies. Now I'm going to mention about land trusts, and maybe Alan will talk a little bit about eco-villages, and maybe Bob will answer or talk a little about zero waste. Because in other words, they have a whole platform for how to live in the world, not just your working world. Oh, and they also have an arts, cultural perspective. So they say, we want to have an arts center that is a worker co-op. So with the land trust...
Can I just jump in?
Yeah.
Ms. Ann O'Shea, just to be right in the middle of the last part of this conversation, wanted to add, and it really wasn't even a question, it was just a point. She says her sister is working on this bill it's in Rhode Island and it's pending, and it's supposed to give the workers a right of first refusal of a business when a business is up for sale. So that's just a point of information for everyone. I'm sorry, just want to move on. Thank you.
Would you raise your hand so people know how they could talk to you later about that? But you could help them to get in touch with her. Because, you know, what happens is we get great information, then we can't follow it up. Is that okay with you? Okay. Okay. So the land trust idea, and it's definitely explained very well in the book. They already have done it. They saw, what is your name, ma'am, that was watching your community? Carol. They saw the same thing happening in Jackson. And so what they did was they created a group of people because they had some political clout, because they had already done organizing to elect a black conscious mayor, Chokwe Lumumba. So they bought up with the money that was pooled together, which is why we asked Richard Wolf a question. I don't know if Kim will remember that question yesterday about how to get workers to get funding from unions. But anyway, they bought up the land and they put it in a type of format called land trust, which means for 99 years, no one can buy that land. It's the collective ownership of that Cooperation Jackson. Okay, so would you raise your hand again? Vietas, what is your last name? Yeah, because he's shaking his head. I'm sure that'll be a resource for you later to ask about. And so that means that that land on that land trust can only be used by Cooperation Jackson. And she's shaking her head. So will you raise your hand? Where are you from? But are you from an organization? CAV. Say it loud. CAAV. Oh, CAAV. And the website is? CAV.org, CAAV.org. And what does that stand for?
Well, we do a lot of work.
Okay, she's going to come up. She's going to come up. Yes, it's good. Listen, how are we going to make a left if we're so scared to talk to each other? Look at these people. They're just human beings. Oh, well, okay, I'll go over there and get, or maybe
Bob,
Kim.
Bob, this is Bob's job to escort you up here. Get her up, Bob.
Okay, she might not. Okay, well, yeah, maybe Kim can ask her to explain a little bit, or I'll go there. The thing is, the laws, like this brother was saying, can be pressed to be changed. Like when I heard expropriation, I first got scared when you said it, but and also when you said it. But the thing is that the pressure on the politicians can be such, if you're organized as a community, if you have the worker co-ops in that community of town, that makes the laws change the interpretation of how it's being given to the community. So land trusts are not unfeasible, and they have been used in New Mexico. There's people who have bought up certain blocks of land in Albuquerque, and then they build housing on that the renters only rent for 99 years. So after 99 years, the city council is going to have to re-up that land trust or not. So if you want to say anything about that, or I'll go and I'll get, oh, she's...
Yeah, we're just going to get a point of clarification about CAV, and so I want to ask...
I'll get out of the way. I can just add one
this
clarification.
young activist to come up. What's your name?
Kim, he just wants to give one clarification before she goes.
Just one quick clarification. People go on our page. I said we laugh at politicians. Right now you'll see a bunch of electoral stuff because we have an election in Ontario on next Thursday.
And what is the page again?
The Toronto Airport Workers Council. So we're in a temporary election mode. We always activate in the last week before, but it's not an electoral strategy. We've got a couple of our people running for office, but after next week it'll go back to our normal day-to-day fun stuff.
Thank you very much. So,
Welcome, dear.
we want to welcome, and I'd like you to just share your name.
Hi, well, my name is Julie. Did you speak from a lecture? If I turn that mic off,
Hi, this is loud. My name is Sabrina Jalal, and I work with an organization called CAV, Committee Against Anti-Asian Violence, in the Lower East Side, Manhattan. And we deal with a lot of, I think Carol? Okay, so like she had mentioned, a lot of gentrification goes around in Chinatown, and we mainly focus with low-income immigrant families that are living in these homes that are supposed to be meant for one family that are like 5-6 family members living in a 1-bedroom apartment. And so we deal with a lot of gentrification happening, and so we are a part of a community land trust organization with John Krinsky.
Slow that down. Spell that out.
Community Land Trust, John Krinsky. And they're an organization that deals with a lot of like land trust issues and how to get communities to fight for themselves and to build around community. And a lot of what has been talked about, whether it be businesses, big box businesses that are coming in and taking over, how do we fight against that, and how do we get the community to be involved in it and not just give up. And the organization's website is just CAAV.org. And yeah, talk about gentrification.
And what about John Krinsky? Does that group have a website too?
You just search up Community Land Trust with this name.
Did you get that, Carol? Come to the mic because they want it on. No, they want it on live stream. Somebody's watching in Milwaukee right now. They can't hear you.
This is just a point of information for you guys. Kathy Dang is speaking tonight at the plenary.
Yes.
Someone's speaking tonight at the plenary.
So CAV's Executive Director, Kathy Dang, she will be speaking at the closing preliminary for today. And if you want to learn more, she is doing at the closing preliminary. So.
And she's from CAV?
Yes, she's our ED. Yes.
Thank you, dear.
Very much. All right. Yeah. It's important information. Thank you. I just want to pick up.
Alan, do you want to talk a little bit about Eco Village? Or
I do, but I want to say something about land. When we were down in Jackson, one of the clarity was that who owns the land, who controls the land, controls what happens on it. And one of the issues that's sure enough coming up the road is some groups, some organizations, some people in New York City at some point are going to grab hold of something and say, this is now ours. And, you know, we thought that the left responded well years ago. I don't know if any of you were involved in the Cellular bakery organizing. And that was an issue that I think if it came up now would have a very different resonance, because so much has been done in terms of support for the thing about change and about this stuff, and particularly around gentrification in New York, is that it's not going to be neat and it's not going to be easy. That unless you own the building where your business is, or you own the land, then you're still caught in the market in terms of your own personal expenses, no matter how good a co-op you are. And so the issues are very complicated, and they're being discussed a lot, and I'm not sure how this stuff got to the point of development in Argentina, or in Mondragon, or in France, or in Italy, or the places where there are really advanced cooperative solidarity economics that are going on. But I think at some point the left in those countries had to throw their support behind what was going on, that no matter what else it was preoccupied with, that this is the future and that there's a vision that people can buy into in that future that's optimistic. It's not simply fighting against or holding a line, but it says when we win, it's going to be different. And I really would recommend that you read Jackson Rising. Somewhere inside of it is 200 years of thinking and brought into a context of real people making a real commitment. And there's a merger in Jackson going on between the historic black worker struggle for self-determination and the workers' movement in America and the solidarity economics movement. There's something very, very special going on there, but it's also very fragile. And I think rightfully the left has taken notice of what's going on in Jackson, not just Jackson, but other places around the United States, including New York. And those of you who don't know Nick Knock, I would strongly recommend that you find out. They really do spectacular work. There is a committee called the Committee in Solidarity with Cooperation Jackson. Because this thing is so fragile down there, it really does need a lot of support. I can't tell you what it's like to be a Marxist effort in black economic politics of Mississippi, let alone that part of the country. And they're up against a lot of forces. It's really a struggle, and these folks are really committed, but they need our help. And we're going to be meeting on the 27th of June. We believe it's St. Mary's Church up in Harlem, but if you can plug into, we need a website.
Democracy at Work?
Yeah, Democracy at Work New York is really a very cool organization to be part of, and we're terrible in terms of our organizational form.
We could at least put a link there.
If you're interested in getting more information about the solidarity work being done with Cooperation Jackson.
Okay, and I think Bob actually has something he would like to share. I know people are getting ready to think about the next panels. Come on down.
And also we have a study group, so you may not think that that's such a wonderful idea, but it brings a lot of young people because they meet with us, sort of older people, and they ask questions. They don't just have to know about the book. So we used Jackson Uprising, could you say it? Jackson Rising, to go through step by step, asking each other questions in a small group formation. And that's how we got so united as people, so we could create this panel out of 5 minutes when we realized 2 of the major people, couldn't come. So I really want you to think about that. You might have 4 friends. How many people have 4 friends? Okay, good. So at least you got 4. And you could just get with them and start a little study group. We work once a month, and that's the group that's going to also support what Alan just talked about. And the last thing I want to say, because Alan referenced it, is they constantly say this is to support the local black community. In other words, one way to defeat racism is to do practical things that actually work with the people of color in the area that have been down-pressed and oppressed. So that's a way, I think. I work with the anti-racist-alliance.com group, and they started also in the South, in New Orleans, that white people who may not be ready to always understand what racism really does to each and every person of color every day. Just like we said, the panel is affected by racism. People are in the hospital because black people die quicker because of the constant...
62. Yeah.
What is it, Bob?
62. No, go ahead.
No,
Finish
say
up.
it into the mic.
Finish
No, but say it into the mic.
Yeah, Tim Skirmahorn is 62 years old.
Yes, and so when you get to be past 50 and you're black, you're quite likely to die sooner than the white person next to you. So anyway, I'm going to turn it back to Bob. I'm just glad that Uprising Jackson always talks about working with the local black community.
So thanks for staying. This is kind of a surprising and an interesting panel discussion from the audience to us and us back. If you haven't read Jackson Rising, it's a series of essays about what Corporation Jackson is trying to do in West Jackson. It's a very poor area. If you haven't read it, you should begin reading chapters 1 and 20. 1 is the introduction by Kali, and 20 is a more detailed description as to the network of businesses and the cooperative nature of the land trust and the businesses that they're trying to develop there. But one of the reasons that there's been a long history of blacks that have returned to the South and trying to regain some autonomy and self-determination. But I think a lot of us have come to the conclusion, and I'm a lawyer, right, that the laws haven't worked. And there was a civil rights movement. There was a New Deal, which is primarily a safety net for the whites. And as it became more available to people of color, we had these stereotypes of welfare queens. But legislation hasn't worked, right? Given the hierarchy in this country, there's been no attention paid and no voices heard from those that are at the bottom, and that's been consistent, and it's true. It was true 100 years ago, it was true 50 years ago, and it's true today. So I think that the thinking is that if you want to establish a power base, maybe the economic power base is where to go, right? And so Kali is trying to do that. There's the Cooper Square Land Trust in the Lower East Side. There are some in the city, but with an economic base that would provide for training and businesses and perhaps housing, which is complicated in terms of cooperative. That this is a source of power that might, and Kali says in his book in the introduction, look, this might be a dream, it might be totally unrealistic. The corporations are so huge and so powerful, and they have so many tools. But you know, we have to start somewhere, and I think that we've all agreed this is the place, that we're going to start here, we're going to start economically, we're going to start with cooperatives, we're going to start with human rights, and relate to each other as human beings and what we need, and we're going to start from the bottom up. So don't be discouraged.
I actually want to share something. Thank you so much. My husband, Bob. Now, the thing that really excites me about this, and Bob tapped into it, and it's not just everything we heard, and community land trusts are important, and the idea of having self-determination is important, but even in a small neighborhood, even in a block, people have needs. There are things that people need to live. We need people who can do labor and people who maybe can provide local health care and help out with the elders. We need all sorts of different things. And there's a very affirmative, almost city planning approach to what you can do when you think about a neighborhood defining that for itself. And I think, thank you, Professor Rennes.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's another aspect to this. When you look at Cooperation Jackson, you think, wow, those are conditions that are very distinct. These are coming out in the South. It's a very, what they're undertaking is sort of determining for themselves the conditions that they need for that community. And it's very translatable here. And even if the laws aren't supportive, and even if there are other things that are very different, the notion of saying we need certain things and there's a core of a community that's going to work to provide the training and to provide the capitalization for it and to get the spaces, that's the level of organizing that people have done before, but now we're working with different tools. And so I suggest to everyone, if you're looking and we're dealing with a bulwark of gentrification, or if we're dealing with trying to find ways to connect training pathways or bring people together, all of these tools offer those opportunities, and we just have to figure out how to make them work. I think it's very urgent in communities of color because, as you know, I mean, everyone's just being pushed out further to the margins, but that's everyone. And I encourage everyone to continue working in this way.
Kim, just before we end, maybe there's people that would like to say something because they didn't say anything. Like you, would you like to say something? Okay.
Yeah, come on.
Yes, come. This man's partner is Fran Luck. I hope it's okay. And they do, what is the name of the show on WBAI, 6 o'clock? WBAI.org, 6 o'clock.
Yes.
Women.
Sir, actually, the podium is right here.
What is the name of Fran's show?
Joy of Resistance.
Joy of Resistance, every Sunday at 6 on WBAI.org, and it's Women's Resistance.
Okay. I also want to, I've read Jackson Rising, and I've also wrote a review of it. I actually also wrote a review of Professor Reynos's book, which is called Cooperatives Confront Capitalism, which also I would recommend as reading. I have to say, I'm really impressed by what the folks are doing down in Jackson. I really hope I get an opportunity to go down there next time there's people going down there. I hope I get an opportunity to go down there. If thinking big were all it took, this would be the most successful thing you ever saw. Let me tell you, folks, these folks, they are thinking really big. Right? I mean, they've got a whole program. It's like, as Lupe said, it's not simply a matter of cooperatives. They've got a whole structure set up, a whole organization, a whole community that they're setting up there. I think it's really in all of our interest to do whatever we can to help them out and get this concept going off the ground, because indeed there's lots of forces against it. Just think of what a racist place Mississippi is, and the last thing the white elites in Mississippi want is for black folks in Jackson to become independent and have their own structures there and not be at the mercy of stronger forces. They want to crush that. Make no mistake about that. So they need all our support. My writings can be found on systemic disorder at systemicdisorder.wordpress.com, which is probably too much to remember. So if you just
repeat it.
Search, yes, systemicdisorder.wordpress.com, or if you just do a text search for systemic disorder, it'll come right up, and you can see my review of Jackson Rising. You really
spell your last name.
I'm sorry?
Spell your last
name. I'm Pete Dolak. That's spelled D as in David, O-L-A-C-K. And again, I would really recommend you can get a sense of what's going on there in the review I wrote of the book, but read the book itself. We really need to get ourselves going up there. It's really inspiring what's going on down there, and it's really an example of, I think, of if we really think about, based on all this history, and based on our experiences, we know capitalism is decaying. And I think this is the last century of capitalism. It's only a matter of what's going to replace it. As Rosa Luxemburg said, it's barbarism or socialism. That's going to be our choice. And I sure hope it's going to be socialism and not barbarism. If it is going to be socialism, and models like what they're doing in Jackson, Mississippi, is very much going to be a big part of the picture.
Pete, before you leave, Kim, is it okay? Alan went to the sites, and it was very interesting in the book study group that we just sort of asked each other questions. I'd love for you to ask him a question, because the question I asked was, how does the worker co-op of the catering business that is now a restaurant that gets food from the farm co-op, the actual produce, and then recycles it to the compost co-op actually work? And he said some things about a conference and how they feed people. And I think it might be good for you to hear this and maybe ask another question. Would you be willing to say what you told us?
Well, we can talk a lot about what they're doing right down in Jackson. Just what, I don't know how else to describe it. They're really being very smart. And they understand that recycling and a program that's environmentally and eco-friendly makes the most sense in the long run of the development of the society they want to live in. And they're being very smart about using their resources, which involves a lot of aquaculture and farming. And Jackson is I mean, we could talk about Jackson for a while, but the reality is that it's the most advanced expression of something positive in America right now, and I don't know how else to say it. And one of the ideas that we've floated was creating a kind of Venceremos Brigade type work study of Jackson in the near future.
Want to explain that a little for people who might not know?
Well, is there anybody who doesn't know what the Venceremos Brigade was? You might not. You're young. Huh? You don't either. For about 30 years, support communities in New York of the Cuban Revolution organized brigades of Americans to go down to Cuba to do three things. One was to study the model, the revolutionary model. The second was to provide material support for the revolution, construction. I helped build a 5-story building in a place called Origuanabo on one of the trips that I was there. And the third was to interact with the Cuban culture and the Cuban people, and to understand that there was something so special going on because the three had merged into something important historically. Jackson feels like it's worthy of that kind of study. And I can't stress enough how fragile that situation is. I mean, you know, I don't want to over-romanticize what they've done. What they've done in the middle of Mississippi, in western Mississippi, is remarkable and miraculous, and only dedicated people who just are committed to a vision and a dream could have pulled this far. But they lost almost all their crop last year because of weather. There were 23 days that were below freezing in Mississippi in their area. And so a lot of the dependency of the other business was on their cash crops. And they lost almost all their cash crop. And we're committed, Democracy at Work New York has committed to helping raise $30,000 to buy a building. In Jackson, Mississippi, you can do that. A building, an entire building, to house the next enterprise that they want to develop, which is a silk screening printing business.
With a 3D computer.
That's the work of the Solidarity Committee, and I want to invite all of you to stay in touch with us in some way. And again, it's the 27th, and if you can make that.
Yeah,
all right.
How do you get the information about where?
I'm going to give you right now when you can.
I got a little thing here. On your way out, if you just leave your contact information, we'll put you on the mailing list.
CooperationJackson.org, for those people who just came in, is the website, and remember on YouTube, and I think they even have a Facebook page, Cooperation Jackson.
Okay. I'd like to...
Are you Lou?
Oh, he's asking you something.
I'd like to ask you another question. One of the things I was struck by as one of their longer-term projects was they wanted to get up a whole system of the so-called 3D printing, where they're going to print consumer stuff and also materials that would be used for other cooperatives. And they were having some difficulty, I know, getting that off the ground. How much progress have they made toward making that?
Well, I believe they've got a commitment of the equipment. To establish a business, they need a building to put the enterprise in. I mean, so they've got a plan for everything. The actualization requires support and money, and get your name on the support list, and we can help out. For you,
I would just like to add something. Please, come on up. We have about 2 minutes, and then we're going to wrap up.
And please sign that yellow pad.
Sir, I'm sorry, your name again, please?
Juan Fernandez. I'd like to add something concrete. There are 2 lots that are being sold into a little house I have in Virginia. And I have the possibility of buying those lots. And my daughter and her husband are both engineers. They're both members of the Society of Black Engineers. We must encourage the Society of Black Engineers to design solar panels, and to have a manufacturing plant. We have to pressure those in the community that have special skills to come to join us. So I need support from someone here to help me. I'll buy the lots because I have collateral and everything else. We need to start something similar to Jackson in different parts of the country. And
I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly why they wrote the book. They said we're taking the risk to put our ideas in print, which our enemies may be able to get more information about us on. But we also envision that what we're doing in Jackson could happen in Idaho, Indiana, or the Bronx. So here we are in the Bronx area, meaning we're 15 to an hour away from the Bronx, and we can do it.
And the important thing is they're actively asking that people do this in their spaces, because we need more networks. We need more communities where we can support each other. So this is the thing we're pushing for, people. Thank you so much for being a collaborative, cooperative audience. I think this is really informative. Okay, everyone?
You got a yellow sheet